Hi everybody, and welcome to my first of two videos that are going to teach you about this and introduce you to the Mamiya Sekor 1000 DTL interchangeable lens single lens reflex camera. This camera is kind of interesting, and Mamiya is known largely for their medium format cameras, and when they came into the 35mm world, they had a much different take on cameras than any of the other makers. And so there are some aspects of this camera which are really innovative, kind of too innovative in some ways. This camera has two metering modes, spot or averaging, which to us sounds like no big deal, but at the time that this came out, it was the only camera that had two metering modes. Well, that's not true. The 500 DTL also had two metering modes and was the baseline version of this camera. This has shutter speeds of 1 to 1000th and B for bulb. The focusing screen is a Fresnel glass focusing screen with micro prism center and ground glass collar. And it has an X-flash sync at 1/60th of a second, as well as the ability to power FP and M bulbs with the FP sync. That's not really a big deal anymore because those bulbs aren't actually available. The 1000 DTL's target market was actually the amateur user. Mamiya set out with this in the 500 to capture the market that they weren't getting. Their RB67 and their 645 medium format cameras were really very popular by professional photographers, but the 35mm market was untouched, largely untouched by them, and the SLR market was almost completely untouched, and so they were trying to branch out into that market. And they came into it with a different set of eyes and a medium format sort of set of eyes, and they made some of the best optics that were being made at the time and put them on fairly innovative cameras that were ahead of their time as well. So, but what tells you that this was designed for the amateur market is it has a simple interface with a lot of good selling points. The big old blue spot and averaging meter is something that you're not going to put on a professional camera. That's meant to catch people's eyes. It competed directly with the Pentax Spotmatic and Nikon cameras, but was not as successful as they were. It was made by Mamiya from 1968 to 1971, and that is about the time I actually have the receipt from when my mom bought this camera for my dad, as well as the two lenses and the camera case that came with it. And I found that, and unfortunately I couldn't find that before the video, but it was produced in Japan, sold all over the world under this name. The predecessors before it was the one, this stemmed directly from the 1000 TL, and it was concurrent with the 500 DTL as well as medium format models, and it was followed by the 2000 DTL. Now let's talk a little bit about the differences. The DTL versus the TL. DTL means dual through the light metering. TL simply means through the light metering. So the TLs had only the average metering. The DTL added spot metering to that as well through a simple switch. The 2000, which replaced this, had a faster shutter speed of 1/2000th of a second. So if you've got your Mamiya Sekor DTL 1000, grab it, and we're going to take a look at some of the camera's features. This video is going to outline the features, and then the second video is going to show you how to use the features effectively. Alright, so here's the top of the camera, and what we're seeing here, we'll start with the strap lugs, even though they're on the side. This is what you attach your camera strap to. This is the film rewind knob and rewind lever right here. On many SLRs that opens up the film back. That's not the case on this one. Here we have an optional accessory shoe which slides into the viewfinder's accessory grooves, which we'll see in just a second. And this is what the camera looks like without the accessory shoe. This is the film plane indicator, which is used for macro measurements. Here we have the shutter speed selector as well as the ISO selector. ASA is the same as ISO, and DIN was another system which is now obsolete that used to be used to measure film speed. And so this camera, unlike any one that I've ever seen before, has a window for each speed on it. And so, for instance, 200 ISO is the same as 24 DIN. And so when you select one, it automatically selects the other. They're the same, it functions the same. This is your shutter speed index line. And also, on many cameras, the shutter speed is selected next to the prism. On this one, it's not, which is really useful if you have something like a flash on top of the prism, so that you can actually look at the shutter speed, and the shutter speed number is not blocked by the big honking flash that you've got up here. This is the shutter actuator, the shutter release button. This is the film advance lever and the film advance window. And the film advance lever has a very interesting metering system, and the meter works through the film advance lever. At rest, you push this, at rest, the film advance lever is hugged up against the body. When you turn on the camera, you pull it out. To turn off the camera, you simply push the button on top of the film advance lever and it pops back in. To meter, once the film advance lever is out, you push in and that activates the meter. And we'll see how that works in detail in the second video. But that's probably a question that a lot of people have about this camera. It took me 6 years to figure that out, and that's not actually an exaggeration. So here's the front of the camera. Let's take this lens off really quickly so we can get a better look at what's going on here. And here's the front of the camera. On the left side, we have the self timer over here. And, oops, wrong way. This also goes the opposite direction of most self timers. Here we have the lens mount. It's an M42 lens mount, very simple. This is the linkage that stops the lens down right as the photo is taken. Here we have the reflex mirror. So let's get a little bit more light in here. So you can see the reflex mirror in the lens and the shutter box there. This is the mode switch, which switches your metering from spot to averaging. And you should be able to see a slight dark spot on in the mirror there. And that is integral to the spot metering system, and I'll tell you how that works in the second video. Here are your PC ports for X on the bottom and FP on the top. X is xenon or modern flash. Any type of flash you would buy in the store today is an X flash. FP is one of the bulb systems that don't exist anymore. On the camera side, we have the film back release, and you just lift up and the film back pops open. On the camera back itself, we don't have a whole lot to see. We have the viewfinder and the film back. Nothing fancy or unnecessary here. On the camera's bottom, we have the battery chamber right here, which is where the battery is going to go. This is the tripod bushing, and this is here's the serial number, and here's the film release button, which you press before rewinding film. So let's open up the camera back here. So here we are inside of the camera. Here we have the film cassette chamber, and the knob retracts so you can load film. Then we have 4 guide rails. The 2 on the outside prevent the film from moving up and down as it travels through the camera, and the 2 on the inside help keep the film flat on plane. Have the focal plane shutter. That's a cloth shutter curtain that opens to get out of the way when an image is taken. This is the film tension sprocket. This keeps the film from moving backwards in the camera, and it helps keep it flat on plane. Probably sensing a theme here. This is the film take-up spool. And so whenever you advance the film take-up spool advances and the sprocket advances so that the film can keep moving. But the sprocket will not rotate backwards unless you push the film release button on the bottom. And now the sprocket rotates backwards so that the film can be rewound. Ooh. There we go. On the film back itself, we have the film pressure plate and the cassette retention spring. And again, those are things that help keep the film flat on plane as it travels through the camera's body. So there's a couple notes on this camera that are important to know. In fact, one of them is incredibly vital. This has an M42 lens mount. So did Pentax and Zenit and some of the others. However, do not use Takumar lenses on this. Specifically, everything I read said do not use SMC Takumar lenses, but I'm not positive that this is not the same for other Takumar lenses. At least the SMC Takumars can jam in the mount because they have a slightly different setup in the back than a standard M42 lens. That might be true for other Takumars. So a good rule of thumb with the Mamiya Sekor series is to use the Mamiya Sekor M42 lenses. You can use the Mamiya lenses on Pentax and Zenit and all of the other M42 bodies out there, but there is a slight difference that makes some of them risky to use in the Mamiyas. Some other things, the dual through the lens, as I said, this was the only camera on the market at the time that had that feature, which was pretty fantastic. It's actually surprising to me that Mamiya wasn't more successful and that there aren't just gajillions of these floating around. Although not entirely, because the spot metering setup is kind of wonky. This had stop-down lens metering, and we'll see again in the second video how that works, but basically you can see, you might be able to see here when I push the lens in, when I push the lens release in, it activates that flappy paddle there. The flappy paddle stops down the aperture in the lens and allows the camera to take an accurate meter reading. It has to stop down the lens to do it, but that's how it meters. These were, and remain today, very, very large and heavy cameras by 35mm cameras standards. Compared to a Pentax H1A, which is basically the same size as a Spotmatic, you can see that it is longer, taller, and deeper. It is in every dimension larger and significantly heavier than the Pentax. And Pentaxes weren't even the smallest on the market. At any rate, they are still, however, extremely, extremely good cameras, and as you'll see in just a moment, they take extremely, extremely good pictures. A couple of things not to do. Do not touch the shutter because you will risk bricking your camera. Don't touch the mirror because you can desilver it, and that will make it very hard to use your camera and possibly ruin the mirror, which probably cannot be replaced anymore. Do not leave your camera and lenses in the car because they can be damaged by the heat. Oils can get where they shouldn't. It can ruin the functionality. Don't store your camera gear in a plastic bag or box because moisture will get in there and it will cause fungus to grow. And don't let this camera get wet because even though it's a good camera, it's not weather sealed and water could get into it and muck up the components. And just remember, your camera is a precision tool, and as long as you use it well and take care of it, it will take care of you. Now, sample photos, just a moment, the moment you've all been waiting for. I'm going to show you all my butt. But first, if this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that I'm producing content which is useful for you guys. If you have any questions, please share those in the comments section below, and if you have any ideas for future videos, let me know. I'd be more than happy to film those for you if I have the technical know-how and the equipment to do it. If you would like to subscribe and find out when I have more film videos coming out, that would be great. You can do that. And the last thing, thank you guys for watching. I'm not partial to this camera just because it was my father's. In fact, until I sat down to research the DTL 1000 for this video, I looked at it as just another average M42 body. But after really learning this camera, I realized how wrong I was. The DTL 1000 is not an average camera. It is serious, but fun. The kind of camera that, were it a person, you could hang out with at the bar one night, and another night ask for help building a deck. But I also understand why this camera wasn't a big seller. Put aside that it wasn't marketed in a compelling manner, and the DTL 1000 is still a large and heavy and very much for nerds camera. And really, if this camera were a person, it would be the type of person who is large and heavy and eager to point out your every mistake. And in cameras, like people, that's simply not an attractive quality. And the DTL 1000 also arrived behind the times, an M42 camera competing with bayonet-mount cameras. And that's rather like a horse cavalry competing with a Sherman tank. Is it a great camera? By every measure, it is. However, it does not help people who do not understand it, and I, for years, did not understand it. And the camera fought against me every time I took a photo. But when I learned it, my DTL 1000 became more of a friend, or at least began to warm up to me. And like the nerds who always want to point out your mistakes, if you can get past that abrasive facade, underneath is something or someone very much worth getting to know.